Welcome to Collecting Recollections. This is a curatorial program of the Ringling Archives where we do exactly what it says. We collect the recollections, we collect the memories of those people who help us to better engage with our history and our collections here at the Ringling Museum. And today our guest is Victoria Cristiani Rossi. She is a fifth-generation member of the internationally renowned Cristiani Circus family and the author of a memoir entitled Spangles, Elephants, Violets, and Me, The Circus Inside Out. So please join me in welcoming Victoria to our stage. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for what is truly a beautiful, illuminating, and very, very powerful book.
Thank you very much.
We spoke earlier. As a writer, you're not only keenly observant, but she has an incredible ability to know that she was also being observed as a performer, and in that. A very empathetic writer to both sides. Her voice in this book is both frankly candid, but also hauntingly poetic at times. And I kept thinking, and I told this to Victoria earlier, she could be and should be a great novelist. I believe that wholeheartedly. But then I realized to write fiction is too safe. And I think in your parlance, it would be, to write fiction would be like performing with a net. But you are, after all, a Cristiani. So you chose the much more perilous and more death-defying of all genres, the personal memoir. Probably scarier than going into a cage with lions.
With my family, it was.
So tell me, which was the greater challenge in life, going into the circus ring or writing a book about it?
Definitely writing a book about it. It was very haunting for me for so long. I went through a lot of stages of animosity, guilt. I was estranged from my family for about 35 years because when the family circus went broke, you know, everybody piled on one another. I worshiped my dad. There was a lot of finger pointing. And when I started writing this book, I had a lot of demons in me. But then, after I really got down to the serious business of putting it down on paper, I decided I've got to get rid of those demons because I need to be fair. I can't just look at my family from the way I saw it from my point of view. I had to look at it from their point of view and be absolutely fair as a writer, otherwise the book would be no good. And so I started in that, and once I was able to liberate myself and try and be fair and see my family as they were not able to see themselves. I was able to stand back. And so, you know, every family facing peril and ruin, there's always trouble, you know, fireworks. And this Italian family was no different. But they were all good people. I knew that from growing up. I knew that. And so I began to look deeper into each one of my family, and I found all the good in them, and then I went from there. So.
Well, in the time we have together, I want to kind of loosely base our conversation around the four nouns in your title. We're going to talk about the spangles.
Okay.
We're going to talk about the elephants. We're going to talk about the violets. And most importantly, we're going to talk about you. But before we do that, I think we need to put your story kind of into a historical context. And you know, like when you read one of those big, huge historical novels, they have the very handy family tree in the back so you know where you are in the story. I think we need to kind of create that family tree. You being a fifth generation member of the family, it all started in the 19th century with would have been your great-great-great-grandfather,
Yep.
Emilio?
That's right.
What can you tell us, just quickly? We don't want to spend a lot of time in the past, but...
I don't think I can really speak with any clarity on that back that far.
Yeah, you weren't there.
But my grandparents, they were just absolutely wonderful people. They were very, they kept the family together. My grandmother never concerned herself much with my granddad's business, but she certainly recognized their ability and their goals and supported them all the way. But my grandfather was the one that was the driving force. He believed that success was not a dream, it was duty. And he had this family to raise and mouths to feed, so he was the driving force behind it.
And he would have been the third.
Yes.
The third generation.
Right.
So there's something that in preparing for today, and maybe you have the answer, because there was your great-great-grandfather Emilio and then his son, and together they created the Cristiani Circus in Italy,
Yes,
which
in
had gone
Italy,
on to be, and then it was into that family that your grandfather was born. And I have read variously that he was one of 16 or 24 or 26 children. And can we zero in on one of those numbers? Do you know?
Gosh, it could be many, many more even. I don't know, but certainly not any less.
But he went on, and the generation that precedes yours, of course, was that great equestrian family.
Yeah, right. Just amazing. Baby, there are 50 pages of pictures in the book, very rare pictures. My aunt Corky helped me assemble a lot of them. And there's a picture of Baby, the Rosenbach horse, that huge, he was so tall, big horse. And my grandfather, actually, my Uncle Pete told me that when my grandfather had the circus in Italy, and when they traveled by wagon, Baby was a young horse, and he purchased them, and he became so interested in that type of horse that's how it started getting the bareback riding act together. So Baby was really old, lived to be a very old age, but Baby started the idea about the Cristiani Riding Act, and he loved those type of horses.
And so the oldest, I believe the oldest child of your
was my dad.
Was your father, Oscar?
My dad, Oscar, and the youngest is Corky.
Okay, so do you have that picture in your mind? We have Emilio. I think the next generation is in Pilade. Am I pronouncing that right? Then Ernesto.
Pete Tapadito. That's my Uncle Pete. Pete and Corky are the only two Cristiani original family of living. And Corky's here tonight, and Pete is not. He's not feeling that great.
I'm going to sneak in my quick story about Corky, can I?
Yes, you can.
One of the first people I met when I came to the Ringling Museum was a wonderful woman who was introduced to me as Corky Budd. And a supporter of the museum, still is. She's with us here today. And we had, when this theater reopened, there was an exhibition in the museum. And part of that exhibition were photographs that were taken on the night that the theater opened in 1958. And in those photographs, there was a big party down at the Catazan, and in the middle of this party was a circus act performing. And like I said, I had met Corky, Aunt Corky, and she looked at the picture and she said, "That's my sister." And I said, "Oh, really? Are you a circus performer?" And she told me that yes, she was, in fact, the world's greatest equestrian ballerina. And I always thought the old joke about Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did, only backwards and in high heels. Corky did everything Dame Margot Fontaine did, only she did it on the back of a horse. And it was later at another event, and I don't know whether Corky remembers this, but I was so excited that I was going to be able to introduce her to a friend that I said, "This is my friend Corky. She used to be a Cristiani." And then she corrected me. She was and continues to be a Cristiani. So that's those are my recollections for what they're worth. So grandfather Ernesto, Papa, brings the circus to America, brings the Cristianis to America at the bequest...
With
or
the Ringling Brothers Circus,
Not
yeah,
the bequest,
that-
the request of the
yes,
Ringling Brothers Circus. And then you were actually born right here in Sarasota.
Yeah, I was born at the Sarasota Memorial Hospital in the old wing in 1940, March 2nd, just turned 75. And about 10 days after my birth, the Ringling Cristianis boarded the Ringling train with me and my mom on their way up to Madison Square Garden in New York. And of course, they had some other performances that they did getting ready for the big date at Madison Square Garden. So I was off on the Ringling train from 10 days old.
Which brings us to the first noun, spangles. You were born into the world of spangles.
Yep.
One of the things in reading your book that I realized, and again, it always comes, it's all new to me. The circus world's all new to me. But you were born into the era there was still a lot of the big traveling shows.
Oh, yeah. Traveling on the circus train was absolutely mind-boggling. And, arriving on the circus lot in the morning, hearing the pounding of stakes, the roars of the lions and all the other animals, and the elephants lifting their trunks, trying to get enough strength to pull the wagons out of the mud and everything. It was amazing. Children that I went to school with, they went to the circus. I was in the circus, So I did have a very unusual childhood, and I wouldn't give it up for anything.
Well, one of the really lovely memories, and this book is packed full of beautiful images. You talk about your favorite spec float, your favorite float.
Yeah, the old lady in the shoe. Yeah.
And so you got to choose every day which?
There were a lot of kids that were already on the circus in the summer because they worked in acts with their parents, But me, I was in school, so when I got out of school and came on the circus, I had to kind of weave my way in a good position in spec, and I loved the old lady in the shoe. And I used to make lunch at the bottom of the shoe. At the end, I'd go in there with a little flashlight and eat lunch. I love that shoe that is now in Baraboo, I believe. Baraboo and also the Mother Goose, both of those. So I used to love to ride them. And I'd always manage a place in spec for one of them. Yeah.
But you also seem to have a real awareness of the kids along the street, who are in the circus audience.
When I used to look out, and I'd be in the spec, and I'd be walking around the track. I'd look, and I've always been an observer for a very young age, and I discovered this later in life, probably when I started to write this book, that I was an observer because I was able to picture everything in my mind. It all started coming back. But I used to love to look at the expressions of the people in the audience, the people in the rows of blue seats and reserved seat sections, and just see their expressions when they saw the animals go by and everything. And I just love. I was never fixated on performers in the circus for some reason, maybe because I belonged to a very famous circus family. Nothing could much top that. But I just always observed the people, the audience, the working men, the concessionaires, and the animals that I loved so much. I treasured the animals so much. I used to love to go in the menagerie. Oh, boy, did that have a stink sometimes in the summertime, But I just loved the animals, and I observed them so much. On the cover of this book is my favorite elephant, Christy. And she was like absolutely a saint. And in this picture, it shows her trunk in the position that I'm in. She's like wrapping around me, not wanting for me to drop. And then there's another picture that was on the internet that I noticed, and I was in a different position, and she put her trunk right in my back to make sure that I wouldn't fall off that way. She was that sensitive. This elephant was almost human. But this is my favorite elephant, Christy.
There's a line or a sentence in your book, and I want to just talk a little bit about Sarasota and the circus community, that world you grew up in. And I loved this line. After the tour of the circus, the time out on the circus, everybody came back to Sarasota for the winter and engaged in what you say, the annual winter sport of dicing one another up into savory bits of gossipy relish.
Goes on in every profession, right? No different in the circus.
But you talked a little bit, you referenced competition phobia.
Yeah. Competition in the wintertime, a lot of people would reform their acts, add new tricks and stuff like that. And so a lot of the times there would be a new act that came out with something that would be a leg up on what they had. So there was always, people were eyeing each other, you know, not wanting to get lost in the competition and be at the top, so that they would get hired, to get the act hired before anybody else.
But that's what kept the circus great.
That's what kept it going. But the competition is in everything. It's in business, everything. You know, that's the way it was. No difference in the circus.
And then something else, and you just mentioned the blue seats.
Yeah.
When you talk with circus folk, with show folk, little parts of that vocabulary come out, and blue seats has...
Yeah, the blue seat was a section generally on the curve of each end of the circus. The reserve seats were on the front and on the good part of the back. And the blue seats were the ones that, like, say, they weren't the reserve seats, they were the cheaper seats. And so usually were piled with all kinds of, when I was traveling in the Midwest, there were farmers and whatever, and then the reserve seats were in the front and they were more expensive. So the blues and then the reserve seats, yeah.
And obviously a major part of Sarasota's circus family were the Cristianis, this large multi-generational family. In one of the newspaper articles that I read, they referred to, they actually called it a 30-acre colony of Cristianis. Were we all kind of together?
There was a street there that off Fruitville that all kind of circus performers were. The Walindas lived across the street. They had the old Mom and Pop Walinda. All the different performers lived all around there. There were some aerialists, there were trapeze performers, the wards and whatever. And that was just kind of like a little community, but there were certainly other residential, you know, normal people in between. But you always used to see in the backyards, you used to see rigging, you know, somebody setting up their trapeze or one thing and the other. That's the way it was back then, you know. But Sarasota is just, I just love Sarasota. It's my dream place to live. But we live in Orlando, have to make a living.
You mentioned the ordinary people, the residential people.
Yeah, the great people.
One of the kind of reoccurring themes that comes out of your book is this awareness of being observed, of being at school, at the boarding school, a circus kid. And I want to read a description that you wrote of your family. It's kind of a great one-sentence description. She said, "It was filled with elements of danger and total chaos, all of which I experienced firsthand, demanding one-night stands, exhausting rain-drenched teardowns, drunken working men brawls," this next one's my favorite, "comical husband-stealing catfights, pasta-throwing family dinners, the whole 9 yards."
Right, right.
And then you followed that in the book and you said, you loved it, you loved living that way, and you don't have much time for anybody who thought differently.
That's the way I felt back then. I mean, I was in my own world, and I couldn't, it was so different at boarding school. The kids were very wealthy kids in that school, and you know, I was very much looked down upon as a circus kid. You know, I wonder if she can stand on her head and all this kind of stuff. But and I wonder if her parents are freaks. You know, I heard behind my back and everything. And it was a very hard time for me. But I also knew, I was keenly aware that I was always a member of a very famous, wonderful family that supported me and loved me. And I always hung on to that, and that's what got me through it.
What were the relations like in Sarasota in those days between its circus community and the us normal folk, us regular
I think
folk,
it
not
was
normal.
very good. I think it was very good. I think the people in Sarasota really, Circus was big at that time, when they did also the greatest show on earth there. No, they looked up to Circus people
So
a
you
lot
didn't
back then.
experience that here?
No, not in Sarasota at all.
That's great.
Never did experience it, no.
You mentioned going to a boarding school, which could not have been a customary thing for a circus child. But you were sent to a boarding school, and again from your book, you said, because your father couldn't have made it clearer that he expected me to find an interest outside the circus.
Yeah, I flatly, I will tell you, I had no talent for the circus. Well, he tried to teach me a flip-flop, and it was a flip and a flop. I just, top heavy, and I had no talent, But so he always wanted me to get an education and to find something interest out of circus life, and he did the right thing. And when I started doing stuff in the circus, it was just a little minor thing. I didn't have a lot of strength. And I could never even climb the web, But I looked good. I could pose. My mother taught me grace. And so I always felt that I made a good presentation. But as far as being a circus performer, I wasn't.
You mentioned your mother, and we're at boarding school, and so this is the part of the spangle part. Share with us what the letters from your mother and the spangles.
Yeah, my mother used to send me letters at boarding school because I started at 6 years old at a cloistered academy run by the Sisters of the Visitation in Cardome Academy in Kentucky, outside of Lexington. And let me tell you, it was a very, I just felt detached totally from the circus. My family were with the Cole Brothers Circus at the time, and they were in Louisville. And so my dad, it was time for me to go to school at 6 years old, so they felt, well, this is a perfect place because we can come on weekends when we're here in the winter and pick her up, for little outings. Well, they didn't know the half of it, but I didn't tell them because I knew it was so expensive for me to go to that school. But the Violets, there was a tennis court in the backyard, and off to the side was like a cluster of trees. And of course, Kentucky is full of wild violets, full of them. And I used to just escape there into that little place, and there were animals, butterflies, rabbits all around there. And I just loved looking at the acreage of violets, and it just kind of took me away. And so that was my little place, my little secret place. Every kid, I think, at one time in their life, whether they're in their house or whatever, they have a little secret place that they like to hide. Some like to hide in the closet even and play with dolls or whatever. That was my secret place when I was at the convent. And so that's where the violets come from, because they gave me such joy. And there was color, because there was no color at the Cardome Academy. Everything was black and white. The nuns were like penguins, with the black and white, and no color at all. And so when I got on the circus from the summer, when the summer came and I went on the circus, it was like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz when she arrived at Oz and everything was black and white, at the beginning with the storm and everything, and then she got off and she went visit, and everything was turned into color. That's the way the circus was to me. It was just my heaven, and I loved it so much, and I just couldn't wait to get around, put on my dungarees, and go meeting everybody and everything, that I was a member of the Cristiani family, so I was something.
And your mother would send you a little
my
spangle.
mother, yes, right. My mother would send me letters when I was at the convent, and she would place sometimes a little spangle at the top of the letter, glue one on, and that reminded me of my next vacation on the circus. So she was very, very good about it. She always wrote letters to me. And my dad, there weren't a lot of phone calls back then, but that's what got me through it, that and my violets.
You credit your mother with giving you your gift for language.
Yes, yes.
And she actually...
She was a reader. She was a reader.
She, again, there's some of the language is wonderful. Tell us what your mother meant by circus holy water.
Circus holy water. Well, back on the circus days, no running water or nothing like that. But, rainwater is very soft, very soft. So the circus performers used to collect water in the buckets, and they would use them for washing their hair and also for washing fineries and stuff like that. And it was like, oh my gosh, if you set your bucket out when it was raining, nobody better touch that bucket. And I'll tell you, there were really fights when somebody took away somebody's bucket, So my mother used to say, hey, that's circus holy water. And she was right. It was circus holy water. Yeah.
Well, you eventually did enter the circus. You already referenced your grandfather's belief that success was not a dream. It was
duty.
A duty.
That's what it was.
But you also, as you said, never saw yourself as a circus performer. And in one interview, you said, I was gripped by fear throughout my childhood and well into my teens. How did you reconcile the duty to make a dream come true, but you were kind of scared?
Well, I just had to take it a little bit of a time when I did the Elephant Act, the one that I fell from, took a terrible fall in Los Angeles. I don't know, it's just youthful boldness, craziness of being youthful. Now I can't dream of doing what I did there in the Elephant Act. It was a very difficult Elephant Act. I think that Kenneth Dodd has a video of, the only video of me doing the Elephant Act. I think it was taken in Philadelphia. It was a very difficult Elephant Act, a lot of mounts and stuff. And my dad was not for it at all. And I think he always had this fear that I might be an accident, which it turned out to be. And that was the accident that I got and broke my leg in 7 places. I've got 3 pins, and I've got a terrible scar on each side of my leg. And the only way I can walk really good is with a heel. And but I just had a wonderful doctor in L.A. and was visited by a lot of circus fans, which were Ricky and David Nelson. They were real circus fans, and they were on the circus lot practically every day. And Ricky Nelson came to see me in the hospital with my cousin Antoinette, and brought me a pizza, pepperoni pizza, and I gobbled that thing down, and I don't think I even shared a piece with him because the food was so awful in the hospital, But they were wonderful, wonderful boys. Every good thing that was written about them is true. They were very, very wonderful boys and never missed a day in L.A. on the circus lot. They were great.
The accident with Mary?
Yeah,
Mary the elephant?
it was Mary, not Christy. Christy had passed by that time. It was Mary, and she was the lead elephant. And we had chain harnesses that my Uncle Pete had made, but there were no leather straps. L.A. was it's a culmination. It leads up to L.A. what happened in L.A., which is very traumatic. But anyway, they had these chain harnesses and chrome, and there were no straps and they felt really tight to the elephant's head. So the first, when I got into the ring, the first trick was the elephants would do the waltz. And they would do the waltz. But when they were smaller, that act had been together for a long time, there was plenty of room for each elephant to pass each other. But by the time I was doing the act, because they had a problem with Barbara Williams, that they had an out, her and Pete, so she didn't do the act no more. So I was, they asked me to do the act, which I was very excited to do. But like I said, it was youthful boldness for me to even think that I could do it, but I did do it. And so when the elephants went to pass, my fingers got caught in the chain, and blood started coming down. I could not hang on any longer. Oh my God, it hurt. Pinch your fingers hurt so bad. So I let go, and just on the spin, thank God, her trunk, she just dropped her trunk and let me go, and I went flying about 20 feet out of the ring. This was in Los Angeles. Movie stars in the ring, in the audience and everything. It was James Gardner, Lucille Ball, everything was big. And we had packed houses every day there. So anyway, when I landed in the middle of a whole bunch of flying axe stakes, and thank God I wasn't impaled, but I landed right in between them. God was helping me. And anyway, I landed, but my foot on the way out, it hit the back of the ring curb, and that's what broke my ankle, and it just busted in a million pieces, And anyway, that's the story of that. But you'll read about that in the book. But it's quite fascinating what went on with this family from the beginning and what they went through. They went through a lot of hardship growing up. There was a lot of competition. And as my Aunt Corky said, there was really too much talent in that family, But they were wonderful, wonderful people. And during dark times and times of a family, facing ruin, there's always problems. And I got to see that, and thank God I was able to stand back and write fairly, because even though I felt that I did, once I got rid of those demons, I made up my mind I was not going to be an apologist for them, but I was going to be fair, and I think I was. I think I was.
One of the great Cristiani achievements or stories that you talk about in the book was the Alaska tour.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Before Alaska was even a state, all the way from Florida to Alaska, or if you're out there, Florida to Alaska. Tell us about that.
We went to, everything went on rail from Wyoming to Dawson Creek. And then once we got in Dawson Creek, the animals came off the train, and then off the train, rail train, and everything, but went by car and truck up the Alcon Highway before it was even a state. You would not believe it. I'm telling you, gravel highway and no cell phones. nothing, and there was always, we had, my Uncle Mogador had placed mechanics in between so that if there was any problems that the mechanic would be able to get there as soon as possible to help people, But it was absolutely amazing. And the Eskimos came when we did Fairbanks and Anchorage, and the Eskimos came clear from Point Barrow in Alaska, and they were just amazing, amazing people. Very peaceful people. They were, I tell you the truth, I was so the circus people were as interested in them as they were in us. And they came selling trinkets, all kinds of stuff, that little ivory jewelry and everything like that. So they were in competition with the concession people, and the circus people were buying as much trinkets from them as they were buying concessions. But what an amazing, wonderful people those Alaskan people were. Everybody, they accepted the circus just wholeheartedly. It was amazing. They had the largest crowd, I think, ever in Fairbanks. In Anchorage coming. People came from all over because the Eskimos had never seen a real elephant before. And we almost didn't bring the elephants. We were worried. My dad was worried about how can they make the trip, whatever. But the final decision was, I can't leave them behind because I can't trust anybody that's going to take care of them. So I'm bringing them with me. So we brought the elephants up there, and oh my goodness, were they a hit. Unbelievable hit. The Eskimos, they laughed when the elephants did poop. Oh my God. They went hysterical. They were laughing in the audience. Look. They couldn't believe it. But oh my goodness, what a thing it was.
Well, there's a couple of Alaska stories that were my favorite.
Yeah, okay.
One, and I'm not sure I know how it ended. One of your uncles was pulled off the side of the road. You were following. I forget what. And it's the horse story.
Oh, my Uncle DeViso, yes. My Uncle DeViso had a beautiful rig. He had it was all custom made. He had quarters for living quarters, all beautiful padded, red padded and leather padded in the front. Anyway, he went to let the horse out. Playboy was his horse. He went to let it out, and all of a sudden, he went in to eat, and he came out, and the horse was gone. The harness broke the harness. So, oh my God, we thought that we came after, we arrived there, and he was going out of his mind because there are bears, you don't know what out there in the Alaskan wilderness. We thought, oh my God, that's the end of the horse, and that was a prize horse of his. Anyway, as it turned out, the horse did end up coming out back on his own, but it was a really traumatic thing that thought that he had lost that horse. But my uncle was full of mosquito bites. There are mosquitoes the size of birds there in Alaska. Oh my gosh, the mosquitoes were horrible, horrible. And so anyway, he was wearing Band-Aids and everything all over himself after when we met up at the next pit stop. Because we had pit stops where we would all meet and kind of gather, you know, to get everything together to go to the next spot. But that was a scary time. And the elephants took off, too. They were out to get water one time in the journey to water, and something scared them, and they all took off. We had mounted the Royal Mounted Police, you know, and they had those airplanes there in Alaska, what they call, and the Royal Mounted Police were on search, and we found them, and they end up coming back all fine, you know, to the truck. But can you imagine losing 4 or 5 elephants in the middle of Alaska, you know, and then the horses? There were all kinds of traumatic things, but oh my God, the beautiful territory. The mountain anchored sky that you could see, I mean, as far as you could, it was just absolutely, oh my gosh, all my memories came back so vivid when I started writing this book. But I've had people tell me that's so interesting a chapter there.
So Mountie always gets his man, but he also always gets his elephant.
Yeah, always gets his elephant.
Okay, one more Alaska story. The snake.
The snake. Oh yeah. Up there, Ben Davenport, which is my Aunt Norma's father, was up there. He brought, you know, there are no snakes in Alaska, okay? Well, at least they weren't. So anyway, at least there weren't. Now, I don't know if that dead snake went and mated with somebody, but anyway, he had snakes from all kinds of different snakes in this little pit show, and made a fortune. The Eskimos were lined up for a half a mile, you know, to go in and pay to see these snakes. But he had one snake that was he had it from the Washington Zoo. I think it was a rock python. And he had it mounted in the glass cage in one of the trucks, and it was mounted. Well, not too long after we got up there, the temperature changed, the snake died. Well, he couldn't miss out on that, so he kept the snake propped up there, and the elephants, he told him that he was in deep hibernation. And then the Eskimos came in and out, and you'd see them, some of them like this or whatever, but I don't know whether they believed it or not, because the snake was really raunchy at that time, you know. Yeah. And anyway, but Ben continued to make money, you know. He continued to make money out of that snake. But anyway, it was finally buried, and I said, well, now Alaska has at least one snake.
I'm going to jump to, I think, just 2 days after your accident.
Okay.
You're in the hospital. David and Ricky are coming to visit you. And then another performer from the circus landed up in the hospital, right?
Yep. That was my future husband at the I didn't know at the time, but anyway, he had left from the military school. He was at University of Oklahoma to come to do that date for this. He was a trick rider, and his brother Rex Rossi, who had been world champion trick rider for several years in a row. They were all doing Western work, and he came to on the show, and I mean, immediately it was almost love at first sight, and oh my goodness, you know, a day or two after I ended up in the hospital, he ended up, a wire from one of the riggings, I believe it was from the fly net, caught his leg when he was doing one of the tricks on his horse went speed. His name was Navajo. He ran like lightning and caught his one leg and took him off. And so he ended up in the hospital with terrible, broke his mouth all the way down. And David Nelson ended up taking him to the hospital. And he ended up a floor down below me, and we started writing notes, and that's the way it started.
Your life in the circus, your career in the circus, was just sort of starting pretty much at the same time. It seemed like that world of circus was coming to an end. And as you said, it was a large, extraordinarily talented and highly successful family in a very competitive business. There was one of the newspaper articles I read referred to the Cristianis with their fiery tempers, infidelities, and fierce family pride. In the book, and you've talked a couple of times today about coming to peace with that, but you wrote a beautiful line, at least it was very poetic, and you said the Cristianis were at the end defeated by their loyalty to the canvas sky.
It certainly was, because they wrote it out. They didn't choose to all of them, they chose to write it out. And it never looked good, but they had this hope, this passion for the tented circus. And it just didn't end well. But I mean, they just couldn't give it up. That was their whole life, and the tented sky, that was their life, their love, their passion from young children over in Europe. And so that's what made their world go. And nothing was going to change that. And of course, they were unequipped to deal with anything other than that, and it was very sad. But because they were good business people, everything they made all the right calls for so long. But it was such a changing time during that time in the 50s. The malls were opening up. The cities were buying up all this property with the what do you call it, the outdoor theaters, and stuff. They were buying it, and they were building malls, and then there was air conditioning, and of course it was just going, it was just going. And Ringling, a long time before that, had already gone and decided to go indoors, but the Cristianis stuck it out with that. And LA date was the most fabulous date. Everybody, circus fans, it'll tell you that were there. It was the most beautiful circus on the planet in LA. And there was buzzing, from night and day. They were full of movie stars, everybody buzzing around. And it was sponsored by the Hadassah, I believe, and Lucille Ball was a member. And I don't know James Garner, but he was there all the time, and a whole bunch of other movie stars in the audience all the time. And it was a spectacular date. It was 10 days. But after LA, I'll let you read.
But you didn't stay off stage.
No.
You went on.
Yeah, I did a lot of dinner theater. I loved theater. I loved acting. And I did Hello, Dolly. I played Dolly, and then I played Unsinkable Molly Brown, Molly, and won Best Actress for the Hello, Dolly. And I just loved theater, And so I did that for a while, and then eventually, had my kids and everything, and got into some other stuff. But I just always loved acting. I liked singing, but that never happened on a professional basis. But I did do nightclubs for a while, and I did do several dates. But then, I don't know, my heart was never, I was into my family. My kids were it.
Well, you mentioned your sons.
Yeah.
They did not become circus performers.
No, they're not. My oldest son, Ben, he's there. He's an attorney. And my youngest son, Ryan, is a financial analyst, and they're both very successful and the most wonderful kids ever. I love them.
We talked about this earlier. We're going to put the boys on the spot because in the book you wrote, "It saddens me that my grandchildren will never enjoy the playground of my youth."
That was a lie, because I thought I may be going to have some grandkids, but I don't have any. But who knows? I was thinking ahead, kind of hoping that it would come, but I don't. That's okay.
Well, unfortunately, I think we're about to run out of time.
It's been wonderful, and I thank everyone for coming.
But before we go, I got to correct one thing in your book, okay? In a chapter titled Relative Observations, which you observe your relatives, you write about yourself that you never considered yourself to be a true circus professional. You talked about that. But then, Victoria, you wrote, "Most regrettably, I made no contribution whatsoever to my family's success or fame, And with all due respect, I think you got that wrong.
Oh, thank you.
Please read this.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think this book very much is going to stand for a long time as a testament to your extraordinary family.
Thank you.
And that is all we have time for today. There are a lot more stories in this book. It's available, of course, for sale today. So please join us across the lobby for a brief reception, and you'll have a chance to meet Victoria, and I know she'll be happy to sign a copy of the book.
You.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.